So we're back with Esther. We're looking at chapters 4 to 7 today, so hopefully you got the message to read the chapters, and if you didn't, then go home and read them at home after the service. But I will just be doing a quick overview of those chapters. So last week, we learned that Haman persuaded King Xerxes to send out an edict that all the Jews in the Persian Empire were to be destroyed. The pur, or the dice, was thrown in the first month, and the date decided for this massacre was the 13th day of the 12th month. So the Jews would be waiting for 11 months, knowing that they were going to be killed. Can't have been very good, can it? Waiting, just waiting for this awful thing to happen. And the response of Mordecai and the other Jews was to grieve. They grieved this edict that had gone out. And they demonstrated their grief by tearing their clothes, by putting on sackcloth. Now, we don't see sacks very often these days, do we? But sackcloth is really rough. It's not comfortable at all. So to put that on instead of ordinary clothes must have been really awful. And then they threw ashes all over themselves as well, and wailed loudly. So all across the Persian Empire, Jews were grieving. But Esther was in the palace. She was protected, and she knew nothing of what was going on until her attendants told her about Mordecai. Well, naturally, she was distressed. What was so bad that Mordecai was acting in this way? She sent clothes to him, but he wouldn't accept them. So then she sent Hathach, the eunuch who looked after her, to find out what was going on. Mordecai sent a message explaining and a copy of the edict and told her to go see the king and beg for mercy for her people. Now, do you remember before he told her not to tell the king that she was Jewish? Now he's saying, you go in there, you tell him you're Jewish, and you beg for mercy for your people. And she just responded by saying, well, it's been a while. I haven't been in to see the king for 30 days. And anyone, including me, including her, who approached him without being summoned would be put to death unless the king held out his golden scepter. Well, previously, when Esther went in to tell the king about the plot against him, this didn't seem to be a problem. But perhaps it's because there's been this gap of when she's been with the king, and back then she was spending a lot of time with him. But now she hadn't seen him for a while. So it was a problem. Well, Mordecai reminded her that as a Jew, she would also die. And if she didn't go to the king, God, in his providence, would provide a different way to save the Jews. And then he makes this statement, and who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. So in other words, this is what it's all been leading up to. This moment. God made sure that you became queen for this very moment. Mordecai knew that God was in control, and yet he and Esther had to act. The fact that God is providentially working in our lives doesn't take away our personal responsibility. It doesn't mean that we just sit back and twiddle our thumbs and wait for things to happen. Because God works through people. He works through the people who are willing to act and bring about his purposes. But before she did anything, Esther enlisted the help of others. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Well, fasting usually goes alongside prayer. So I think we can assume that these people were praying as well as fasting. She needed the prayers of her people. And as Christians too, we need the support and prayers of our community of believers. Maybe the church here, or maybe you've got a small group of confidants or a prayer partner, but we need the prayers of the community of believers, as well as wise advice. At the end of the 3 days, God had obviously spoken to her, but we're not told what he said, but we're told that she prepared to go in and see the king. And she put on her royal robes and went boldly. So after praying and fasting, she did something. She acted, just trusting that God was in control. God, dear. She hadn't seen the king for 30 days. She knew she could die. She'd imagine her heart was in her mouth as she went in. But the king held out his scepter to her. And given that opportunity, she spoke. She took the opportunity that God provided for her. How often do we get given opportunities to speak or to act and to tell people about Jesus, and we fail to grasp it? It happens, doesn't it? You get home and you think, oh, I should have said, but we didn't. We missed it. When touching the scepter, Esther could quite as easily have blurted out the problem and begged the king for mercy. But instead, she chose to invite the king to a banquet and to bring Haman along with him. She was patient, she was generous as she prepared to make her request to the king. And then when the king says, well, what do you want? Tell me, what is it you want? She invites them to a second banquet. I imagine that she was using the time to work out the best way to say what she wanted to say, to be wise and gracious, while at the same time still being honest. Well, Haman went home all puffed up and boasted about being honoured and being the only one other than the king who'd been invited to Esther's banquet. But on his way home, yet again, Mordecai refused to bow to him. And that rage that we talked about last week, that rage and anger just rose up again. And in the end, his wife and his friends said, oh, for goodness sake, put up a pole and impale Mordecai on it, and then go and enjoy your banquet. But things backfired, all because the king had a sleepless night. Just get yourself some chairs and join a table, okay? He tossed and he turned, he couldn't sleep, and asked somebody to read the Chronicles to him. And as they were read, he realised that Mordecai had never been honoured for exposing the plot to kill him. Just as Haman arrived at court, ready to ask the king to impale Mordecai, the king asked him, actually, how do you honor someone? Oh, Mordecai thought, oh, great, I'm going to be honored now. This is going to be good. And he said, well, put a royal robe on them. Give them a royal horse to ride and lead them through the city shouting, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Can you imagine how he felt when the king said, okay, thank you, now go and do that for Mordecai? I would imagine he felt this big, humiliated, mortified. At home, having told his wife and his friends what happened, they just said to him, you know what? There's no way you are going to win against Mordecai because God is on his side and you are a Jew, and he is a Jew. So in chapter 7, verses 3 to 4, we finally see Esther asking for mercy for her people and identifying Haman as the one who orchestrated the plot to kill the Jews. This time the king was angry and he had Haman impaled on the pole that was meant for Mordecai. All the twists and turns in this story as God works through the different events. Okay, so we're going to take some time to have a think about Mordecai's statement. And who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And just think about Esther's response to that statement and what we can learn from this story this week about Esther. And then there's a question, have you ever been in a situation for such a time as this? Or maybe you are in a situation where only you could do something. So that's for you to talk about and to discuss. So in your groups around your tables, then the questions are on there and they're on the screen as well if you need them. Okay, so off you go. people who are different things in their lives are helped by somebody else who's been through the same difficulties. Yes, yeah, absolutely. She was very brave. Yes. Yeah, I sat with the table and we talked about how we're not sure we could be quite so brave if we knew that we were likely to be killed. And she kind of took time, didn't she, to make the right decisions and to get the wisdom that God needed to give her. Yeah, anything else?
She reminds me of Mary.
You have to speak a bit louder.
She reminds me of Mary, mother of Jesus, almost like Mary being so young and trusting God. I think about it, she would have probably been young and trusting God as well. Like still then grateful and respected and trusted. Just as like comparison.
Yeah, that.
Different personality, but sort of that very young God's asking you a big thing and you're both trusting.
Yeah, that trust in God, isn't it? Knowing that He is working and being able to trust in Him. Yeah? Did anybody else come up with anything else?
Similar, like trusting God's timing.
Yeah. Obedience. And obedience. Yeah, absolutely. She did what God wanted her to do. Deep breath. Just find it quite remarkable. Yeah, so this was the time that she was there for. You know, she could have run away, she could have said, no way, I'm not going to do it, but she didn't. She trusted God, and she got over it. So have you ever been in a situation for such a time as this? I know some people have said that they were. I think if we look back, we can quite often see that we have been in a particular place at a particular time for a particular purpose. John has a friend who went to work in an office and really wasn't happy and felt that it was the wrong decision, she should have left. But there was a younger woman there who was being harassed by the boss. And this older lady was able to take her under her wing and help her and support her through that time. So had she left like she was planning, then she wouldn't have been there to look after this younger woman who was experienced this harassment. So she felt that she was there at that job for such a time as this. You know? And then once it had all been sorted out, she moved on. So it's surprising, I think, sometimes when we look back and see how God has used us in particular
situations, and he's used us